Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome once again to another live stream. This is amongst the totality of live streams that we do. This is, I think, one of the five that we do weekly. Property Matters today, Ipsy Kind of Magic tomorrow, and then onwards to Property Quorum, and of course Cladding Matters. Cladding Matters is possibly our most watched one. We talk about not just cladding, but also what happens when you take the cladding off. And also, importantly, the strictures that are currently being pontificated over in the upper and lower houses about how those should ensure that we get more houses built, but to a standard, and whether or not that standard is worth the paper it's written on. But that is for another time. Today, we're talking about landlords, properties, and of course, why so many landlords are in fact worried. And this is all about the EPC shake-up. Hamish, would you care to explain more?
Probably it's worth a mention historically this, where the EPC fits in. It's yet another of those wondrous things which materialized as a consequence of Europe. Because It was a European sort of statement, and everybody was meant to have the performance, the energy performance of their property inspected.
Right.
Throughout Europe.
I mean, at first sight, that seems to be a sensible thing to do.
Oh, well, yes, if you do it properly. Now, just to put the whole thing in perspective, to see that there are different ways of doing it, what they did in Greece, they sent a form out to their constituents, if you like, in Greece, asked them to fill in the form, and that is their energy performance certificate. So how much did that cost? Not a lot.
No, but would you say it was reflective of the actual energy performance of the houses?
No.
Right. So it cost very little, but it didn't demonstrate a whole lot either.
Unfortunately, many of the EPCs don't demonstrate the full effectiveness of the performance of the house. In many cases, they can't because it's difficult. Because it's a little bit like, because there can be gaps here and there. There can be things that go on in a loft that people don't actually sort of realise, because it's at the point in time they are looking, and it's a visual thing which is actually sort of carried out rather than sort of anything else.
So it is an educated guess at best. Is that what you're saying?
Well, really? It's a bit unfair, because some of these guys do a good job. They do the best they can, but what it is something which was set up, and I think it was set up. It was the early 2000s. It was actually sort of set up. I can't remember when it sort of came in, around about the 2007 mark.
Right.
But it was a bit of a debacle, because all sorts of things were meant to be happening, and they were training people. The whole idea. It was a sort of a foolish survey that was meant to be carried out, as well as this EPC, the Energy Performance Certificate, and people were being trained up at great cost throughout the country, and it never happened. But it was introduced in this country to coincide with the Home Information Packs. That's why it sort of came about, and it was thought, we can put Home Information Packs. Now, it is important, apparently, because it can make a couple £100 difference in a particular sort of property. But you would expect, if you bought a property which was, if you like, a historic building, for whatever particular sort of reason, it's been there for 3,000 years. Well, not quite 3,000, maybe 300 would be a sensible idea. But even longer, but let's say it's been there for 300 years.
A goodly length of time.
Yes, one would expect there to be less efficiency in the way in which it's sort of built. Strangely, actually, some of those buildings perform better than some of the newer built properties.
I've found that myself.
We're having problems with our fridge at the moment, and I decided to sort of take a little look into what it would cost to get. And I was looking at this American style, which seems a very, very good style. And they're all the efficiency of those is an F.
F.
F for Freddy.
F for rubbish. My goodness.
Well, it could be, but I mean, that's what it is. It's F. Now let's get back to the question that we have. First and foremost, the way the energy performance certificate is estimated and then sort of calculated is way out of date, and that does need uplifting. That does need to be improved.
Right.
However, that yet has not been done.
Ah.
So that hasn't yet been improved. And it's one of those things. They're kicking the can down the road. It was meant to be 2025 at one stage, and they booted it down to something like 2027, 28, and now it's been booted down the road to 2030. However, in order to get some of these buildings into, and this is the rented out ones, so it's hitting the wrong guys again. So it's hitting out the properties that are going to be let out to the public. So it's back to those landlords. The landlords are going to have to pay for the increase in the efficiency of these particular properties.
Oh God! It's almost guaranteeing that the rental market is going to suffer because there'll be A, less landlords, and B, less houses.
Absolutely, and of course, the people that can afford to pay for it really we're back to what we speak about sort of all the time. It's the corporates, the big corporates who own hundreds of properties. They're the ones because of what they can actually do, and they're the ones. And as we found out previously, I think it was last week, they're very cunning, because what many of those landlords will do, there will be a built-in cost increase on an annual basis as a sort of recovery.
Right.
So automatically theirs will go up. The private landlord is not so likely to put the prices up. And if he does,
because he probably or she has probably, or they have probably built a relationship, because they're private landlords, with the tenant themselves, and that familiarity leads to the fact, well, I don't want to inconvenience them, but by the same token, now my property is more of a millstone rather than a money-making object or a property.
That's right. So now when you look at it, are all of these people going to pay out the money in 2030, or are they going to start doing things now? What they are starting to do now, or continuing to do, I should say, is to look at the value to them of carrying on with what they're doing.
Well, as Chris and I have both talked about with you on a number of occasions. Chris is a friend of the show, who is a developer specifically in the HMO space in Liverpool. And we both wish him very great luck in his endeavors today. I know he's working hard. And as a comment has popped in, although it's not a complete comment, I think I get their drift. They said corporates, and what I think he means by that, and what I think Chris thinks, is we're moving towards a space where the very few private landlords, and you'll have medium to large size businesses owning tracts of properties and flats and what have you, and it'll become what I've referred to as generation rent, and more like the German style, where there almost are no private landlords. You know, I think that's where we're going to go. I'm not sure it's a good thing, but it seems to be inexorably where we're moving to.
I think we ought to carry out a sort of full investigation and just have one of our podcasts purely on that, because in answer to the question, this is the challenges with the corporate side of things. They can afford much more than can the individual landlords, because of the built-in, as we were speaking about, the built-in aspect relative to the rent, because they're going to push it up. It's the other aspect is too. I mean, you need to be careful about. Now, I was speaking to Tiff. Was Tiff on last week or the week before?
The week before.
Somebody with social housing, whatever. But we were speaking about social housing, and we did a sort of brief check. Her property has an out-of-date energy performance certificate on it, so it's not up to date. It's not a grade C, and I've got I've next to where I live. One of the properties is, and this is one of the great things, you can actually look up in the register and see what the property is anyway.
Right.
So you actually look it up. That one's completely out of date. I don't even have an EPC on mine. Why? Well, the property hasn't actually been sold in the time frame where it was the legality. And the whole idea is you have to check out if once it gets, when you want to sell it, you do need to sell it with an EPC, with that energy performance certificate. So what we've got, of course, and when we actually sort of look at Tiffis in a council house, there are still some council houses. They aren't, I thought they'd all switch to social, but it's interesting to find out even one of the team can tell me, and I can learn things from one of the team. And we will actually put this out. We'll have a discussion with Tiff, and we will actually discuss the difference between council houses and social houses.
Right.
Because the interesting thing about council houses, because they have so few now, it's a bit like we were speaking about the private landlords, those smaller landlords.
Right.
They have a better working relationship. So there is better, if you like, there's a better supply and more consistency relative to the council compared to because most social housing people, they are corporates. They're not in there to provide housing. They are in there to make money.
To provide profit, and profit often to their shareholders. So they're driven by a group of people wanting to see a return on your investment, not on the comfort and support given to tenants living in property. Spencer Collins, a long time friend of the show, has actually made a comment. If the 2028 and 2030 EPCC mandates collide with aging stock and costly retrofit, zero support, and landlords dealing with policy failure, will it be, or will there be is it a calculated strategy to collapse traditional rental model? I don't think it's calculated to collapse it. I think that will be the byproduct. What do you think?
I think Spencer's halfway right, because it does actually sort of seem, and many of the activities which have been carried out within the, and this is where, of course, when we have an expert like sort of Chris about, for example, he can explain it much more effectively. But there does seem to have been this massive, great drive that is demonstrating that most authorities and most councils are happier with a corporate style provider. Because what do you think about this? When I worked for Unipart, come back to Unipart again, when I was working on engineering, we carried out a particular exercise, which was sort of down to me as a sort of senior buyer there. We needed to reduce the number of suppliers that we had.
Right.
For componentry that we were buying in for the manufacture of automotive products. And we had something on the books. We had something like over 400. And of course, you get one product from them, from some of them on that list. Some of them were just a couple. Some of them were hundreds of thousands. Some of them were millions. So you have to actually say, could one of those suppliers actually supply more than one product? Could they supply maybe 10? But between when it took us 4 or 5 years to do it, but we did actually knock it down to 150 suppliers, of which 20 to 25 were the most consistent. But just for the oddball thing, particularly those with older vehicles, when you were looking at the aftermarket. And it was so much easier dealing with that smaller number of suppliers. You look at it from the council's perspective, or even the government's perspective, if you've got fewer people responsible, it is easier to keep an eye, or it should be easy to keep an eye on what's going. But the unfortunate thing is, because they would be dealing with some of the corporate providers, they will have thousands of properties all over the country. it does get a bit difficult for those suppliers then to keep tabs on exactly what is going on. But they want to minimize costs. Sometimes they minimize their costs by cutting corners. And one or two people we've heard from, they've had interesting things to say about the cutting corners of these particular these people that have masses and masses of properties, because they get people to do the repair work who they know. And of course, they're cutting as many corners as they can. I don't mean this disrespectfully. This is the building industry. They've been doing it for years, probably centuries, if truth were known. And it is something which will continue. But what it does mean, it creates a situation. It will push up rents, and as was sort of intimated there by Spencer, yet again, it is going to put significant pressure on the buy-to-let sort of type of property, which means more and more landlords are going to be departing. So there will be, whether it's done on purpose, there is good reason to do it from the council's perspective.
Right.
Is that what's going on? It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. But what it does mean, there's just so many things. Because the EPC, the guys, if you like, anybody that's involved, anybody has property, it's not the sort of thing you can pay for immediately. If you've got an on-cost, it's going to cost you 15 grand to upgrade. What do? Do you spend that 15 grand? I mean, you've probably got to borrow it. But would it perhaps be better to do it over 3 or 4 years rather than sort of one big hit? So at least you would start getting some of that money back. But you're going to have to increase rent.
This is the problem. We have this, you know what they say, that shit flows downhill, and it's with all this new demands for new strictures and new information and the costs associated, that always is going to be borne eventually by the tenant, isn't it? Dear.
One of these strange things that we seem to have a government that don't understand fully financial implications, because they're saying things where it's absolutely great. We've got these goodness knows how many thousands of people taking up the free breakfast club. Well, it's free to the people attending. It's not free to the people who are providing. The schools have got to cover the cost somehow, and the only reason that way they'll be cover the cost if taxpayers pay the money. So there's very few free lunches. We hear of the occasional ones. I think I got offered one actually earlier today, but very rarely does it sort of come about, because usually what sort of happens, somebody's got to pay for that particular sort of lunch, and this is what we're going to actually sort of have. Yes, the energy, but it's a little bit like if you spend 10 grand on solar panels. I mean, that's an outlandish sum. You can save £100 a year, and you think, well, great. Who there wants to spend out sort of 10 grand to save £100 a year? That's going to take quite a long time to recover the cost of that. But it is not quite like that. It does cost. It doesn't cost as much in the majority of cases, but it can do. But your cost of recovery, I mean, you know your experience, Gareth, it can be actually improved on. So the situation is this: we have yet another burden, sadly, being put on those providers. And it would be good, again, the feedback, thanks Spencer for that. It would be good if somebody can actually give us some feedback, if they can sort of see a benefit to those who are renting the property. If their property's being pushed up, their rent's being pushed up by 50, 100, 150, 200 pounds a month, just so it can go into move up a couple of categories in the energy sort of side of things. Does it work out to be worth it for those that are renting property?
Well, and on that bombshell, thank you all for watching. I suddenly saw the numbers swelling up, and of course, thank you all the new subscribers and watchers. Please do, if you want to see these back again, they're all on YouTube. The channel's called Spilling the Proper Tea, as in TEA. Spilling the Property, and we talk about, you'll find there's a whole brace of different podcasts on there, all relating to property, all talking about different aspects of it, and they're all great fun. Today, I guess probably not as fun, because talking about the landlords having yet more burdens on them, but by the same token, being forewarned is forearmed. We can only do something about a thing that we know is happening. So I suppose it's good news, because knowledge is power. Hamish McClay, thank you very much for being the inspiration, helping set this up. And all of you out there, keep watching us. And at the very least, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and please try and look after your mental health. Until tomorrow, in fact, I wish you goodbye. Goodbye now.